We shouldn't have accepted this assignment, grumbled Clixaviern. Shouldn't have allowed myself to be lured this near to Terran territory. Should have abandoned ship the moment I found out. Never should have assisted with loading the slaves. The stocky Zorgath anxiously smoothed his arm spikes as the prowler neared the Nexus gate. The other 3 members of the bridge crew failed to conceal their unease any better. Virmalox, their Zorgath communications specialist, was gazing at his console as if it might suddenly strike, and Trax's broodmate and shipmaster, Drell Norin, had become deathly motionless. Only Jath, their Krevian pilot, appeared somewhat composed, but he had to be. Aligning a proper approach vector to any gate was challenging, and the Nexus fielding jump was regarded as one of the most difficult of all. Minor errors were fatal. Trax trembled. He'd nearly prefer being captured by Terrans to failing a jump. Nearly. 30 seconds until event horizon, announced the helmsman. Commence final jump preparations. Trax held off until the final moment before engaging the safety locks on the gravitics array. He consistently disliked deactivating them. Without those sensitive sensors, the prowler was practically sightless. But the strain of a jump would rip an active system to pieces. It was preferable to avert your gaze from your foe's talon than to observe it pierce through your eye. There wasn't much use in covering your face for an extended period, however. The Zorgath had already begun practicing the reboot sequence when the vessel lurched through the gate. We're picking up a ripple from the gate, Commander. It's not another rock this time. Looks to be a merchantman. If I'm not mistaken, it's likely a slaver. Are you certain about that, Hollister? You've made the same claim about the last 6 or so rocks that floated by. The slightest trace of a smile flickered across Commander Eric Vance's austere expression. Petty Officer Walt Hollister winced. This one's triggering the gravitics, sir. Powered propulsion, galactic compact type. Very well, then. Let's hope you don't have me chasing after another asteroid. Tharn raised his voice to carry across the Tans Barracuda's cramped bridge. XO, sound general quarters. Helm, set an intercept course. TAC, prepare to disable the ship's engines. Sensors, do inform me if this turns out to be another false alarm. Calling general quarters, aye. Proceeding on intercept course, aye. Preparing firing solution, aye. Confirming not rock status, aye. Tharn smiled icily as the Moray raced towards the slowing compact freighter. He was going to relish this. Trax had almost soaked through his vac suit in the 43 seconds it took to get the gravitic array functioning again. 43 sightless seconds. It seemed to last for hours. He looked down at his console and breathed a sigh of relief. The broad sweep showed nothing, which was essentially the same as saying there was nothing out there. All objects emitted grav waves across the broad spectrum. No contact, he said. System looks abandoned. Tension drained from the bridge at his words. Finn released a death grip on his chair arms, while Kier blinked broadly and looked around with clear relief. Even Jath appeared to become more at ease, settling back into his typical Krevian arrogance. Trax hadn't noticed how nervous the crew was. That should teach Finn to accept slave runs that border Terran space, the Zorgath mused. Those blasted mammals almost killed us with fear alone. He adjusted the delicate sensors as the prowler turned towards its next approach vector. Trax had never discovered anything during one of these secondary sweeps, but it was protocol, and the broodfather alone knew what those twice-cursed mammals were capable of. He wasn't about to lower his guard here. One of the high bands detected a small blip on his screen. It didn't linger for long. Trax nearly missed it completely, but it was definitely there. Could the array be faulty? Malfunctioning arrays weren't uncommon, and they'd had to decide between entering the gates with outdated jump charts or postponing some essential maintenance. The choice had essentially made itself. Good jump, Jath, Kier remarked. Have you been practicing? I was worried the prowler might come apart during the jump into Nexus. I invested a bit more effort for our distinguished passenger, responded the Krevian. Moreover, we're carrying some valuable cargo on board. We wouldn't want to risk injuring one of their fragile necks before that Silther gets them to market, would we? Doesn't come from my cut, I only fire the weapons. Boast to the shipmaster if you're after a pay increase. The apparition flickered back into existence on a lower frequency, lingering for a few moments more this time. It appeared slightly nearer, but that was likely just his anxious mind deceiving him. The gravitational systems were probably just malfunctioning. They must be. Is everything all right, Trax? Finn had made his way to the console and was glancing over the Zorgath's shoulder. You look as if you've just encountered a Terran. Trax struggled to maintain a casual tone. Nah, nothing like that. Just regretting that we passed on that last maintenance cycle. Arrays spitting out ghosts as if they're newborns. The sensors technician stood up. You still recall how to perform the sweeps? I'm going to inspect the casing, ensure it's not simply a loose connection or something. Finn retracted his arm spikes with a hint of amusement. I still remember. Go fiddle around in Prowler's innards for a while. We'll be past this border area in no time. The Zorgath's voice took on a more serious note. Just keep me informed of what you discover. Today doesn't seem like the right day to be taking risks. Trax verified that his sidearm was securely fastened before standing up. I'm in agreement with that. I'll return to the deck well ahead of our jump out. Hollister, any sign that they've seen us? No, sir. The new multi-band compensator seems to be doing the trick. Very good. XO, relay the message to Lieutenant Steele and the Marines. ETA, 5 minutes until intercept. Trax gazed at the partly dismantled Gravitix array in silent dismay. Each connection was securely fitted, none of the internal components showed signs of wear, and all of his diagnostic tests had returned clear results. There was no apparent issue. Those sensor ghosts should never have appeared on his screens. Unless they weren't ghosts, he thought. Unless they were Terrans. He started off at a dead sprint. Trax had barely cleared the first hatch when the engineering compartment burst into flames. Precise strikes on their rear nacelles, sensor systems, and power network, Commander. The vessel's completely immobilized. Good shooting, TAC. Get ready to launch the pods when we're within range. Helm, move us alongside. We need to get Steele's platoon aboard that vessel. Readying boarding pods, aye. Bringing us alongside, aye. Trax regained consciousness gradually. The vessel had fallen quiet, with the anti-plant's soft hum giving way to an unsettling silence. The passageways were illuminated by the ghostly red of the emergency glow strips, and the hatch at his back was firmly sealed. Their artificial gravity had also failed. It took the Zorgath a moment to realize what had occurred. Engineering must have sustained a direct pulsar strike. That meant their mechanic had been ejected into space. He would have met the same fate as the cheerful Blixar if he hadn't fled when he did. His back was still sore from where he'd been thrown against the airlock. If it had sealed a few seconds later, he might have been pulled out into the vacuum of space. He moved over to one of the wall panels and examined the readouts. Primary nacelles were offline, main reactor conduits were severed, and the gravitics were likely shattered beyond repair. Someone had even activated the override code that eliminated the free-roaming slaves. That appeared a bit hasty. Protocol only called for the cooks and cleaners to be terminated in the case of a boarding. Trax's arm spikes shot straight out as the sharp crackle of pulsar darts floated down from the bridge. Were there Terrans on the Prowler? Likely, though. He couldn't fathom how. Cursed mammalian cleverness. Where was his sidearm? It ought to be in his holster. It had been in his holster. Where had it gone? The slave master. He might reach the slave master. That aged Croth would have kept their loned Luprine battle pair nearby and secluded in one of the more protected compartments. The four of them could make it to one of the escape pods and launch themselves towards the gate. Even a random jump was preferable to allowing one of the Terrans to capture him. Trax flinched as his back made contact with one of the bulkheads. Just a wall, not Terrans. At least he wasn't simply floating through the corridor. The Zorgath proceeded deeper into the ship with brief, cautious hops. He needed to reach the slave master. Ground team, this is Moray. Status? Commander Tharn interlaced his fingers and observed the young communications ensign. The officer was much too young, but that was hardly unusual. Every member of his crew, with the potential exception of his XO, was too young. Their initial contact had been far too violent. Moray, ground actual here. We've secured the bridge without any losses. 3 enemy combatants down. They couldn't erase the manifests in time. Seems we've caught ourselves a slaver. Current objective? Mainframe control. Second squad has already been sent out. First squad will search the nearby corridors and offer backup. Affirmative. Your technician get the helmet cams working? Negative. We'll need to forward the problem to procurement. unable to get half of the alleged features of these Mark IIIs functioning. It won't, however, impact combat readiness. Happy hunting, then. Moray out. Trax hadn't ever noticed how massive the Prowler truly was. They were able to cram about 100 slaves into the cells, pack the holds with around 10,000 liters of cargo, and still have plenty of room for passengers and crew. It took him almost 10 minutes of frenzied zero-G leaps to reach the slave master's quarters. He stifled a frustrated groan upon glimpsing the figures moving within the room. Humans. They were enormous, standing almost 2 meters in height and easily double the width of Trax. Their dull black armor resembled something from a bad dream, all harsh angles and flat surfaces. Each one held a rifle that might have been mistaken for a compact cannon, and not one of them uttered a sound. Trax nearly overlooked the smaller, four-legged figure moving among the 6 humans. It almost resembled an Avari, but he couldn't imagine one of those delicate avians donning the same frightening armor as the cursed mammals. And no Avari had ever moved with such predatory grace. The creature was every bit as much a soldier as the humans. The slave master's body was nowhere to be seen in the room. The Luprine battle pair's remains were also absent. This was a positive sign. It suggested that his companion could still be living. Unfortunately, their vessel's only paying passenger hadn't been as fortunate. Denexus 285 hadn't even climbed high enough to be given a name. The low-ranking Silthar had chartered their vessel on a gamble. If the Prowler had reached its destination, a newly established vassal domain of Nexus, the slimy little jellyfish would have been virtually guaranteed a position on one of the lower councils. Now he was quite literally tied into a knot. Trax couldn't resist making a quiet, empathetic sound. That must have been painful. Every head in the room spun towards him. Shit. Moray ground. Actual here. We've captured a VIP and one of my fire teams is getting ready for quick extraction. The psychologists are going to find this one interesting. The remaining members of First Squad are chasing after a target on the run. ETA on the mainframe penetration? 10 minutes, sir. Second Squad wishes to inform you that this junker's internal system is absolute garbage. Tech reports it's comparable to attempting to hack into a decayed log. A rotted log, sir? He could rip it apart easily enough, but then the blasted OS would collapse under its own weight. The safeties on the anti-plant would go down with it. Got it. I'll check if we can get some of our technicians to assist. Any other updates you need to share? Negative, though the rest of First Squad is presently chasing after a hostile. I'll provide an update soon. We look forward to it. Moray out. Trax careened from bulkhead to bulkhead as he fled. He couldn't hear the pursuing Terrans behind him, but hurried glances over his shoulder confirmed they were still there. They weren't hurtling wildly about the corridors either. They pushed off into the zero-G with fluid, deliberate motions, pausing occasionally to fire a shot at the fleeing Zorgath. The pulsar darts were getting uncomfortably close. If the accursed slave master wasn't in his quarters, where could he be hiding? The mainframe room, that place was defensible. He'd have gone there. Trax could reach the mainframe. It wasn't far. He altered his plans when a human in black armor appeared from the hallway ahead. The Terrans likely had control of the mainframe by now. That left the escape pods or the slave chambers as options. Could he utilize the slaves as bargaining chips? That might be effective. They possessed at least a dozen well-trained Avari, and those avians were quite valuable. After 3 swift bounces, he was hurtling downward toward the cells, with the Terrans in close pursuit. The diminutive, 4-legged alien at the front of his chasers made even the agile humans appear awkward and poorly adapted to the zero-gravity environment. He rushed through the dining area where the remnants of the second watch were drifting in a pool of blood. Pulsar blasts had ripped them apart before they had had a chance to do more than pull out their sidearms. Trax scarcely registered the devastation. He darted into an access hatchway and rushed for a door 2 decks below. He was near, just another 100 meters of passageway, and he'd be secure. That cursed slave master had better be there. A pulsar round whizzed by his head, scorching his skin. Trax careened around the final bend at a breakneck pace before hurling himself through the partially open hatch. He nearly wept with relief. The scarred Kroth slave master was present, his uneven form hunched over an exposed electronics panel, accompanied by the 2 towering Luprine. Both of the wolf-like extraterrestrials had pulse rifles aimed out the doorway. "Thank the brood you're still breathing," gasped Trax. "The remainder of the vessel's overrun with Terrans." "I'm aware," the slave master replied. "Why do you suppose we haven't attempted to escape to the pods?" "You're hoping to barter with the slaves?" "Kind of. Terrans aren't into slaves like civilized cultures are, so we're attempting a slightly different approach." Trax peeked beyond the makeshift barricade and instantly recoiled. A volley of pulsar darts narrowly missed his withdrawing head. He couldn't even tell where the shots had originated from. "Whatever this plan is, it had better succeed. I don't believe we're going to be able to fight our way out of this situation." "Moray, ground actual here, requesting a secure channel to Moray actual." "Ground actual, this is Moray actual. The line is secure. 4 members of the crew have barricaded themselves in the slave cells. They're insisting we grant them unrestricted access to the escape pods, and they're warning that they'll release as many slaves as possible if we refuse to meet their demands." "How far can they get with the pods, Lieutenant?" "Quite a distance, sir. Their vessel can launch them into the gate with sufficient velocity to return them to Nexus." "Naturally they can." Tharn let out a sigh. "You're aware we're not able to negotiate steel? The Admiralty has been rather explicit about that." "Got it, sir. Wasn't planning to inquire, to be honest. As it happens, one of my technicians was thoughtful enough to highlight a conveniently located service passage running alongside the cells. If we can position the breaching charge correctly—" Tharn allowed his expression to ease into a predatory smile. This was the aspect of his work he relished. Trax fiddled with the control switch anxiously. It was set up as a dead man switch. If he removed his claw from the trigger, the slave cells would release atmosphere. Well, all the ones in the vicinity would. Those blasted Terrans would likely block the signal before it could propagate through the ship and reach the low-value chattel. He was holding a pulse rifle awkwardly in his left arm, with his arm spikes wedged through the carry handle to prevent it from slipping. Trax sincerely wished he'd be capable of aiming the weapon. A single frantic, unarmed pursuit through the vessel's passageways was more than sufficient. The pair of Luprine remained stationary, guarding the partially open hatch, though their ears were twitching wildly. The slave master appeared even more unsettled, seemingly torn between seeking shelter behind an upturned table or lurking in a dimly lit corner of the chamber. At least he had both hands available for his rifle. Trax regretted agreeing to carry the cursed switch. A metallic clang echoed from behind him, causing him to whirl around and nearly lose his grip on his rifle. The dead man's switch almost slipped as he struggled to stabilize the long-barreled weapon. "Watch it, Bug," snarled the slave master. "You let that fall and the Terrans are going to be a bit upset." "I've got this, Fleshwart. Just try not to shoot me in the back, out of instinct." The Croth merely emitted a repulsed noise and retreated deeper into the darkness. Trax could scarcely discern its misshapen silhouette. Another dull clang echoed from behind the rear bulkhead. Wasn't the secondary nacelle located back there? Yes, it was, most likely ripping itself apart while they waited for the Terrans to give in. They really ought to have used their last haul on maintenance, star charts be damned. "Trax, do you have any idea what that sound is?" All signs of disdain had disappeared from the Croth's tone. "I hardly know my way around this blasted ship." "Most likely just one of the nacelles," Trax clarified. "There's nothing back there except a maintenance corridor that leads—" The room exploded into blinding white light. Trax had let go of the switch, grasped his rifle with both hands, and surveyed the room. The pair of Luprine were already down, shredded by pulsar darts and debris from the exploded bulkhead. But the slave master remained standing. He was unleashing a barrage of fire into a freshly opened gap in the rear bulkhead. The Terrans were responding with their own volley. A small, four-legged figure, clad in Terran black, leapt over the fallen battle pair. No one noticed the faint hiss of air escaping from the nearby slave cells. "Those blasted mammals must have sliced through the maintenance tunnel," Trax mused. "Now it's completely and utterly hopeless." Considering the options didn't take much time. Trax spun around and fired about 20 shots into the slave master before dropping the rifle, retracting his arm spikes, and positioning his arms in front of his head. His forearms faced inward in the customary gesture of surrender. The smaller quadrupedal alien swiftly tackled him. He had time for one final frantic realization before he was slammed against a bulkhead. What did I do with the switch? Sergeant Fang, ground actual here. Mori's just informed us their small arm sensors activated. What's your status? The Avari's voice returned, tense with strain. The hostage situation has been dealt with, sir. 4 enemy combatants are KIA. Casualties? Not any of ours, sir, but they succeeded in leaving 17 Avari exposed to space before we were able to halt them. It would have been a higher number if Second Squad hadn't managed to seal them off from the remaining parts of the vessel. Excellent work. Anything else to report? No, sir, but I do have a request. Would it be possible for me to attend to the burial of the deceased hostages? The vessel has been secured. My team can manage without me for about an hour, and we don't have any other Avari available to conduct the rites. I don't see why not. Take all the time you need, Sergeant. Trax stirred from unconsciousness for the second time that day. Repetition hadn't made the entire experience any more pleasant. Their final stronghold had been ripped to shreds. The Luprine combat duo drifted where they'd collapsed, their torsos shredded by pulsar blasts. Fragments of the Croth Overseer floated around the chamber, leaving trails of dense gray blood. And in the corner, the diminutive armored figure was carefully enveloping a suffocated Avari in a blanket. It had taken off its helmet. Trax observed the Terran with wide, frightened eyes. It had to be an Avari. The 4 vivid violet eyes were unmistakable, as were its downy plumage and gently beaked face. He'd traded hundreds like him, yet none of the Avari he'd traded had ever appeared so menacing, or furious, or carried such a large knife. The bird-like creature noticed the Zorgath observing him and said, "It's uniling impeccable." "Ah, you're awake. I was hopeful, but one can never be certain with head injuries." "Are you—" Trax's voice faltered. "Are you planning to kill me?" "Nah." The Avari's gaze turned even colder. "No need. You're already dead." A sigh of relief transformed into a choked gasp as the bird went on. "Officially dead, that is. Actual life hasn't quite caught up with the paperwork yet." The armored Avari carefully maneuvered a blanket-wrapped body into the compact airlock with solemn accuracy. It then retreated and activated the lock, ejecting the corpse into the void of space. One more body remained. The Terran said this as it pulled another blanket over the sad bundle of feathers. "You didn't nourish your slaves properly, did you? Likely had some concoction to allow you to get by with these diets, then plump them up a few days before market. Reduces expenses and all that." It secured the blanket, then pulled out its knife. The Avari had taken off its left gauntlet. As it drew the blade across its bare forearm, blue-tinted blood trickled down onto the blanket. Trax could do nothing but observe in silence. "Not sure why I'm surprised, really. I've heard the humans didn't treat their chickens all that much better." The body ejected from the airlock. The Avari propelled himself towards an emergency locker and retrieved a Zorgath-sized EVA frame. He extended it with a thoughtful expression, then rotated it and opened the control panel. Naturally, Earth chickens aren't capable of firing weapons, and humans cease slaughtering chickens roughly when they develop the technology to produce lab-grown meat. I've never understood why the other civilizations in the galaxy don't adopt a similar approach. The Avari's voice faded away. Trax was unable to make out what the being was mumbling under its breath, but he found the tone unsettling. He also disliked the harsh, scraping noises produced by the knife. "Come on, little worm, crawl in." The Avari nudged the frame towards him, then motioned with his blade. "Don't dawdle now." Trax grabbed it and started to put it on automatically. He was capable of donning the emergency equipment even while asleep. Here's the thing. The hard-shelled boots cinched tight over his slippers. You don't have much intelligence value. The propulsion pack locked in place on his back. And you certainly don't wield any political capital. The helmet slid down over his bulbous head, its front face open. No one will come searching for you this near to Terran territory. That implies no military reaction, no salvage teams, and no rescue squads scanning the area for damaged capsules. No complaints filed with the Terran embassy, and nothing to indicate that you didn't perish when we raided the chamber. Trax sensed an air canister snap into position on his back. He scarcely registered the Avari's push that propelled him across the room. All of this can remain our little secret. It floated nearer to the Zorgath and pressed the enormous blade into his hand. He heard a crisp tearing sound as it was adhered against an unmoving palm. Then he was propelled backwards through a narrow opening until his back collided with an outer hatch. The Avari observed dispassionately. "You may want to seal that bucket." The airlock cycled while Track scrambled. He just managed to get his helmet's visor down in time. The Zorgath inhaled deeply while examining his readouts. He had sufficient air to last for weeks, along with climate control for slightly more than half that time. And that cursed knife. However, there were no food supplies, no propulsion or communications. Not even the headlights remained functional. The icy, contorted body of an Avari collided with the slaver. He yelled, not a soul heard.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.